Have you ever felt small in the face of a giant challenge? Or felt as if the whole world was against you, even when you knew you were doing the right thing? If so, then you might have more in common with one of history's greatest kings than you realize. Prepare to dive into the incredible journey of David, a simple shepherd who became Israel's most beloved king and a man after God's own heart. But don't be mistaken, David wasn't perfect. His story is filled with extreme highs and lows, overwhelming victories and devastating failures, which is exactly what makes his journey so fascinating and relevant to us today. Our story begins in Bethlehem, a small town on the outskirts of Jerusalem, where we meet Jesse's family. An ordinary man, yet his lineage was about to change the course of Israel's history. In 1 Samuel 16:1, we read that the Lord sent the prophet Samuel to Bethlehem, to the house of Jesse, with a secret and crucial mission to anoint Israel's new king. Jesse had 8 sons, and David was the youngest. While his older brothers were admired for their strength and stature, David spent his days tending his father's sheep. This seemingly insignificant task was shaping the future king's character. In Bethlehem's fields, David learned lessons no palace could teach him. He developed courage by protecting the flock from predators, compassion by caring for the weaker sheep, and leadership as he guided the flock to green pastures and still waters. Little did he know, he was being prepared to lead a nation. In 1 Samuel 16:11, when Samuel arrived at Jesse's home, all the older sons were presented one by one, but the Lord hadn't chosen any of them. Samuel asked Jesse if he had any other sons, and Jesse replied, "There is still the youngest, but he is tending the sheep." When David finally arrived, Samuel's heart must have leaped. Before him stood a young man with a ruddy complexion, beautiful eyes, and a good appearance. But what mattered most was what the Lord saw. Samuel anointed David as the Lord commanded, marking a moment that would forever change David's life and the fate of Israel. Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed David in the presence of his brothers, and from that day, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Imagine the scene. A young shepherd, likely confused and surprised, being anointed as Israel's future king. His brothers, who had always seen him as the youngest sibling, now witnessed something extraordinary. Yet David's journey was just beginning. After his anointing, David returned to the fields. Externally, nothing had changed. He was still a shepherd, still caring for the sheep, but internally, a transformation had begun. The Spirit of the Lord was with him, preparing him for what lay ahead. Meanwhile, darkness was settling in King Saul's court. In 1 Samuel 16:14-23, we read that the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit began to torment him. Saul's servants sought a solution and suggested that a skilled harp player might calm the troubled king. David's name was mentioned. One of the servants knew of him and described him as not only a skilled musician, but also a brave warrior, wise in speech and attractive in appearance. Most importantly, the Lord is with him. So David was summoned to Saul's court. The young shepherd who had recently spent his days in Bethlehem's fields now found himself in the royal palace, playing to soothe the king's troubled spirit. Saul was impressed with David and made him his armor-bearer. Here we see how God was orchestrating events. David's musical talents, honed during long hours in the fields, now positioned him to learn about the court and leadership, preparing him for his future role. But the moment that would truly define David's youth was yet to come. In 1 Samuel 17, we find the famous confrontation between David and Goliath. The Israelite army was at war with the Philistines, and a Philistine champion named Goliath challenged the Israelites daily to send a warrior to fight him one-on-one. Goliath was a giant, standing about 9 feet tall. His armor weighed more than 50 kilos, and the tip of his spear was as thick as a weaver's beam. For 40 days, he mocked the Israelite army, challenging them to send a champion to fight him. David, who had temporarily returned to tend his father's sheep, was sent to the battlefield to bring supplies to his older brothers. Upon his arrival, he heard Goliath's challenge and was outraged. "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" he demanded. David's courage in the face of the giant was not born in that moment. It had been forged in the fields of Bethlehem, where he had faced lions and bears to protect his flock. When questioned about his ability to confront Goliath, David confidently replied, "The Lord, who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the bear, will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." Armed only with his sling, 5 smooth stones from the brook, and unshakable faith in God, David advanced to meet Goliath. The contrast couldn't have been greater. A young shepherd versus an experienced warrior, a sling versus a sword, faith against brute strength. When Goliath saw David, he despised him for his youth, sneering, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" But David responded with words that would echo through the ages. "You come against me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel's armies, whom you have defied." With a single stone from his sling, David struck Goliath on the forehead, and the giant fell. In an instant, the improbable happened. The shepherd defeated the warrior. Faith triumphed over fear. David's victory over Goliath was not just a military triumph, but a powerful testament to the strength that comes from faith in God. This victory marked the true beginning of David's rise from an obscure shepherd to a national hero. Women sang in the streets, "Saul has killed his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." David's youth, from his secret anointing to his public victory over Goliath, laid the foundation for all that would follow. It teaches us powerful lessons about preparation, courage, and trust in God. David did not become a great leader overnight. Each experience in his youth, tending sheep, playing for Saul, facing Goliath, was a building block in the construction of his character and leadership.